Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name is Lauren Matlock and I am joined by my two colleagues, Alicia Rainier, whom many of you met already, and Carrie Appel. Today's discussion is intended to provide a refresher on mid-year educator evaluation activities and give you an opportunity to reflect on implementation to date. So please note we've muted all of your microphones to reduce ambient noise, but if you have a question, there is a questions box. You can go ahead and put questions there if you'd like to share your experience or if you have a question. We'll be pausing at key points throughout the webinar to answer those questions. So we know that you are very busy, but we're hoping that this brief webinar will give you an opportunity to reflect on educator evaluation implementation and identify next steps moving forward. During this webinar, you will have an opportunity to share strategies for facilitating mid-year conversations. The mid-year conference is a great opportunity to check in with the educators and share some formative feedback with the educator. That said, we also know that having conversations about performance can be challenging. We will share some strategies and questions with you, but we also hope that you will share some strategies that have worked for you with us. We will also walk through 3 different scenarios related to an educator's SLOs and revisit when mid-year SLO or SOO revisions are acceptable. At the end, we'll review timelines for implementation and close out and give you an opportunity to identify next steps. So before we go any further, we want to just take an opportunity to get a sense of, where you are in the process. So we have a series of just 3 questions, and we're going to just ask you to answer the following poll. So the first question asks, which statement best describes where you are in the process? Please go ahead and just select which best describes where you are. We'll give you another 30 seconds or so to put in your answer. All right, so it looks like of those who responded, you've either scheduled all of your mid-year conferences or you've started facilitating your mid-year conferences and have some more to go. That's great. That's a great first step. So hopefully this webinar will be helpful and help you think about those conferences. All right, I'm going to ask another question. And this one asks, have you held those conferences? Another 10 seconds or so. All right, great. So, and I'm sorry, I misread that question. So this question asks, have you held conferences with those people who are not in a full evaluation year? So as you may recall, anyone who's not having a full evaluation this year must have at least one conference with their evaluator. And it looks like, at least some of you have scheduled conferences with those people, but it is something to think about. Between now and the end of the year, you will have to meet at least once with those folks. And then the final question that we're going to ask before we dive into the meat of the webinar asks, how many of your observations have you completed? Take another 10 seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it. So again, great first early steps. So, you've all completed all of your first observations, and some of you are already working on your second observations. That's great. So hopefully, again, today you'll have an opportunity to think about whether you are on track, maybe, and make sure that you're going to be able to finish in a timely manner. All right, so I'm going to now turn it over to my colleague, Carrie, who's going to talk a little bit about mid-year conferences.
Hi, everyone. So now we're going to transition into the mid-year conferences. There are a number of preparations that you're going to want to make before you meet with your teacher or support professional. First, definitely review all of the evidence gathered on that educator so far. That way you can speak knowledgeably and specifically to the educator about his or her practice. Definitely don't want to wing it. And reviewing all of the observation data and the artifacts, student data, identify several areas of strength and several areas in which the educator can improve. In doing this, think about the kinds of questions you'd like to ask him or her in order to get that educator to really think substantively about his or her practice. And sometimes the hardest part is finding meaningful suggestions for the most talented teachers. So definitely spend some time thinking about how they may take their practice to the next level. And for your educators who are on PIPs, it is extremely important to ensure that they are following what they have set out to do. They will most definitely need your help and support. Also, before your scheduled conference, you will want to make sure that you have cleared your calendar to give your teacher or support professional that quality time. Try not to make them wait for you or to go over the scheduled meeting time. And have an agenda already set that you mail out to them beforehand so that your meeting stays focused. This will also ensure that the educator comes to the meeting prepared. In most cases, this will mean that the educator has had time to reflect on questions that you have set beforehand. It's also important to remember that you are both people with emotions, and as we know, the business of education is a personal one. So the educator is going to be looking at you to set the tone. Be positive, and when necessary, be firm, but always try to be supportive. This is especially true for those conferences involving educators who are struggling. These are going to probably be your hardest ones. The best thing for everyone involved is to be open and honest about next steps for that educator. And again, it should come from a place of support. During the conference, you're going to want to create a climate of understanding and inquiry. Invoke all of those best practice protocols and norms that define successful meetings. From the obvious one of listening and not interrupting to the more difficult one of facilitating the conference so it stays on track. In all cases, you will want to keep to your agenda, reassuring and supporting the educator as you do so. And in some cases, despite your best intentions, the meeting may get emotional for the educator. At that point, it is well within your purview to end the meeting and reschedule for a later time. There's no sense in sort of dragging it through if somebody is really upset. All right, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Alicia.
Hi, everybody. Nice to see some of you. At the mid-year conference, you're going to want to discuss an educator's professional practice. For teachers and support professionals, this aligns with the standards in domains 1 and 2. You will review each observation that you've completed and any of the scores that you may have assigned. Teachers will want to discuss any evidence and feedback that you have given and may even want to dispute some of your ratings. When talking about professional practice, you should be honest, yet focus on improving student outcomes with no judgment or bias. To reiterate from earlier in the presentation, your role is one of leadership and support. In addition, beware of offering too much information about final ratings that an educator will hold you to. Educators may, and probably will, want to know specifically where you see them, especially at the mid-year conference. But rather than committing to ratings, discuss specific learning and how the educator can move along progressively. Provide a general impression of how the teacher or support professional is doing, and offer suggestions and feedback. Evaluators are strongly encouraged not to make hints at final ratings until the end of the evaluation process. So the following questions are a few ways to focus your discussion through an educator's professional practice that have a supportive and collegial tone. Those are noted right here on the slide. For those of you who have already started or completed your mid-year conferences, and that looks good from the poll, are there any questions about professional practice that you asked that have led to good conversation? If so, please feel free to add your question to the chat box.
So I think what we'll do, since there's only a few of us, if you have a question that you've used throughout, just go ahead and add it, and we'll compile any additional questions, and we'll send that out rather than slow the presentation down, and we'll just keep going.
So next, you're going to want to discuss professional responsibilities. This is an opportunity to talk with an educator about their professional growth goals or goal, and the extent to which they have completed the action steps and apply that learning in the classroom. So that's a really important piece we want to call your attention to. That's not about the action steps, but how they apply it in their classroom. You may ask for artifacts that the educator would need to share in order for you to rate those components at the end of the year. Again, you're coming from a level of guidance and support so that the educator knows that you are a resource for ensuring improved classroom performance and responsibility to the school. So I'm going to ask another question, but again, we'll go with what Lauren said. Are there any questions that may be not in the box above on your slide that have been helpful to ask about professional responsibilities during your mid-year conferences? Okay, so an important part of the mid-year conversation is discussion around student learning. This is a great opportunity to talk about how students are progressing toward attainment of their targets in the SLO or SOOs, and how educators are using formative and benchmark assessments to determine progress. Here are some general prompts that may be used in getting the conversation started. During the conversation, you or the educator may think that revisions need to be made to the SLO or SOO. Keep in mind, and we cannot stress this enough, that revisions to the SLO or SOO should be rare and are based on a major change or an extenuating circumstance. So as this slide says, and if you've been to the summer or October training, it may need revision if these four things exist. The teaching schedule or assignment has changed significantly. The composition of the class or caseload has changed significantly. New, more reliable sources of evidence are available, or new information gathered since the SLOs or SOOs were set suggests that the objectives fail to address the most important learning and challenges in the classroom. You should not be changing your SLOs or SOOs just because students are not reaching their targets. That, instead, is an opportunity for conversation about what further supports an educator and students may need in order to reach those targets. But you, of course, use your judgment when considering other reasons for revision.
Okay, so in the next few slides, we're going to walk through three scenarios. One where students are on track to meet their SLO targets, one where students are not on track and the teacher wants to revise the SLO, and one where the teacher presents an acceptable reason or compelling case to revise the SLO. So it can be easy to want to skip talking about SLOs and SOOs with educators whose students are demonstrating learning and progress. However, this can be an important reflection and learning opportunity both for you and the educator. So think about, how does the educator know that students are making progress? Are there things that the educator has found to be particularly successful? For example, if the educator has recently implemented blending learning or a new instructional technique and is seeing great results with kids, you might want to make a note to have this educator share his or her learnings in a future staff meeting. This is also an opportunity to help the educator think about how she or he will continue to challenge students if they meet their targets before the end of the course or year. As we mentioned earlier, just because students are not on track to meet their SLO targets is not a reason to revise the SLO. If a teacher comes to you and wants to revise the SLO, but they don't have an acceptable reason why, this is the opportunity for conversation about the supports needed, not a conversation for revision. So instead, probe about the evidence the educator has thus far and why the students are not on track. You might brainstorm ways the educator can leverage additional resources or supports to increase their impact. So, for example, if data suggests that English language learner students are really struggling to access the content in the teacher's class, you might think about how the teacher can collaborate with the school or district ELL specialist to plan differentiated lessons for these learners. Similarly, a school nurse who's not seeing a decrease in preventable office visits might not need to revise her SOO, but instead might want to rethink how she educates and communicates with teachers and students about how to limit office visits and prevent spreading germs. At the mid-year, if students are not on track to meet their targets, the evaluator and the teacher have to work together to unpack why this might be the case. One place to examine would be observations of professional practice. Many participants might not have made the direct connection between SLOs and professional practice and have been thinking of them as separate. However, it's important to stress how linked they are. While there may be cases in which a teacher's professional practice ratings are all high, but their students are not making adequate progress, examining teacher practice in the classroom is a good first step. Finally, in some cases, it might make sense for an educator to revise his or her SLO. If this is the case, and again, this is in an extenuating circumstance or a significant change has happened, talk through which parts of the SLO need to be revised. So for example, if the class composition has significantly changed, in that case, the educator might only need to update the baseline information and targets for students. But if a teacher has changed teaching assignment mid-year for some reason, then more substantial revisions might be needed. They may need to write a completely new SLO in that particular case. So before we proceed, are there any other questions about SLO or SOO revisions? If so, go ahead and put them in the question box, and we'll pause for about 30 seconds to see if anyone has questions. All right, looks like there's no questions, but if anything pops in your head, feel free to put it in the question box. All right, I'm going to turn it back to Alicia to talk a little bit more about conferences.
So after your conference, you want to ensure that you document it confidentially and accurately using whatever form or system that your district or school endorses. Waiting to document a conference may result in loss of information that you once found important to review when you get to the end of the year reviews and final scoring. It is also important to note here that each district or school has certain rules and policies for what information goes in a teacher's human resources file. Usually these documents become part of an educator's service record and can be used if needed for legal reasons. It's always a good idea to check with your district to ensure that you're following procedures related to record keeping. Depending on how the conference is progressing, you may need to schedule a follow-up session with the educator to revisit some items. Be prepared to have realistic suggestions that can be implemented in a timely fashion, such as having a teacher observe a colleague or recommending a website. Don't promise something that you can't deliver. It is also important that with any follow-up, you have some timelines and accountability. For example, who will do what and by when. Administrators are busy and can be easily and unintentionally distracted by other things that require your attention. It is important that you follow up and follow through with educators to show that their needs are important. It will build a culture of trust and support with that educator. Before we move on, are there any other questions about mid-year conferences? If there are, please type them in the question box. The mid-year conference is an important milestone in the educator evaluation process. Once you have completed your mid-year conferences, you are more than halfway through the implementation of educator evaluation. This time of year is also a great opportunity to evaluate whether you are on track to complete the evaluations assigned to you in a timely manner. Now let's look ahead to the rest of the year and some key tasks that you will need to complete before the end of the year. District timelines may vary slightly here, but by the end of the year you will need to complete these steps. Think about your observations. Earlier in the webinar, you noted from the poll that about half to all of your mid-year conferences were done and your observations. Are you on track to complete your observations before your district deadline? Have you blocked off time in your schedule to complete these observations? If you are behind schedule, how do you intend to make up those observations? If you evaluate support professionals or building administrators, you may also want to consider the quality and quantity of evidence you have collected so far. Because professional practice for those two groups is rated holistically based on evidence gathered over time, it's important to determine now if there are gaps in your evidence because you just haven't had an opportunity to see something in action. Are there certain components that are observable but you've not had an opportunity to see in action yet? For example, maybe you have gathered extensive evidence over time for most components through the first two observations in day-to-day interactions, but you notice that you have less evidence for component 2C, which focuses on whether services are student-focused. If that's the case, you may want to prioritize observing the social worker's facilitation of a social skills group during the third observation. If you have complementary evaluators, you may want to involve them in reflection as well. Professional responsibilities is also rated holistically over time. Although many educators will upload artifacts, many professional responsibility components are observable. For example, you may have been in a team meeting and noticed that an educator was extremely engaged in sharing their expertise with others. This is a piece of evidence for professional responsibilities. Think about whether you have jotted down notes throughout the year and if you need to be more diligent in jotting down things that you observe. In the late spring, most likely April through May for most districts, you will need to ensure that all educators submit their SLOs and SOOs and professional growth goals evidence. If you have new educators, you may want to think about what support or refresher they may need to complete this task. You might hold a brief drop-in session so that they can ask you questions about this, field questions during teen time, or ask a veteran teacher to buddy up and help them with the upload process. Emphasize in your communications that submitting illustrative quality artifacts is more important than submitting a large number. You will not have time to truly review and consider artifacts if you have a large number of them to comb through. Remember, in a lot of our trainings, we said less is more, and in most cases, if you need more evidence, either you didn't observe it or you can ask for more. After your educators submit their SLOs or SOO evidence with their PGG evidence, you will need to score the SLOs, SOOs, and PGGs. We are planning an in-person professional learning opportunity in the spring to give you an opportunity to calibrate on SLO, SOO, and PGG scoring. We will also walk you through the remaining steps in greater detail, but I will preview these steps of the process now to aid you in backwards mapping and planning process. End-of-the-year conferences provide an opportunity for you and the educator to reflect on the educator's performance for the year, identify potential growth and leadership opportunities for the educator for next year, and discuss the final effectiveness rating. At the end of the year, all forms need to be finalized in EPSS, and the final effectiveness rating report needs to be submitted for all educators. The final effectiveness rating report is pre-populated from other forms, so in most cases it just requires you to verify that the information is accurate and submit it to the teacher. However, if an educator did not have a final effectiveness rating, either because they were not evaluated due to the cyclical process or because they had an extended absence, you'll need to indicate that on the final effectiveness report why the educator did not have a rating. It is a great feeling at the end of the year to submit all your forms and know that you have successfully evaluated the educators on your caseload at the end of the year. It's easy to sigh a breath of relief and not think about that educator evaluation until the fall. However, late spring and early summer are prime opportunities to begin to review and use data to inform professional learning, hiring, and placement. The data from educator evaluation can help you think about professional learning needs for the following year and how you might capitalize on the individual strengths of teachers when determining greater course placement both for teachers and students in the coming year. In the spring season, we'll show you some reports you can run in EPSS and give you an opportunity to practice using the data to think about other talent management decisions.
Okay, and thinking about the rest of the school year, there are things that you can do so that you're not scrambling in May. For one, determine what evidence you still need to collect for your support professionals. You may even want to generate a chart to keep you focused and organized. Similarly, you may want to do this for all your educators with regard to professional responsibilities. Ask yourself, what can I observe naturally and what makes more sense to be documented with an artifact? Finally, don't forget about those educators who are in their non-summative year, those teachers who are in the off cycle, as Lauren had mentioned earlier. Even though they are not being evaluated, they still should have at least one annual conference with you. And now is the time to reflect and ask yourself if you feel prepared to conduct a middle-of-the-year conference for your educators. Perhaps there's more evidence documentation you still need to gather, or perhaps you'd like to observe that teacher one more time. In any case, preparedness is the most important criterion for a successful conference. Additionally, think about priorities, both in the short term and the long term. Successful evaluation of all your educators takes purposeful planning and organizing. And we are here to help and support you if you have any questions, concerns, or just want ideas and strategies for finishing the year strong. Please reach out. So take a minute now to think personally about how you would answer these questions. And if there's something that is still confusing for you or presenting a roadblock, definitely take the time to type it in the box so we can address it. We'll give you about 30 seconds to do that.
I'm also going to unmute all of you guys because there's so few of you. So if you have any questions that we haven't answered, go ahead and just ask them.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you. This was really helpful.
Hi,
Brian.
Oh, I taken down notes. I feel pretty good about where I am. This is helpful, and I look back to reconnecting sometime in the spring to keep us all on track.
Great.
Thank you. This is Francesca. Thank you for offering this webinar to us.
Sure. Do you have any questions, or is there anything that you're struggling with?
I think I'm okay. I actually just came back from maternity leave, so I'm picking up where they left. So as soon as I do, I will definitely reach out to you guys.
Great. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, so as we end here today, this last slide, it's a preview of the topics that we'll be covering at that upcoming in-person end-of-year session that Alicia had referenced earlier. So we'll definitely want to make sure you come back so we can go over all of this really important end-of-year stuff.
And we're going to go ahead and close the webinar if you don't have any other questions. There will be a survey that just pops up, so please just take a minute to fill that out so we know how we can better support you moving forward. Thanks so much for joining, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.